Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Academy, announcing the 24th of our Italian Wine Ambassador courses to be held in London, Austria, and Hong Kong from the 27th to the 29th of July. Are you up for the challenge of this demanding course? Do you want to be the next Italian Wine Ambassador? Learn more and apply now at vinitalyinternational.com.
Thanks for tuning in to Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People on the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Steve Raye, your host, and this podcast features interviews with the people actually making a difference in the Italian wine market in America, their experiences, challenges, and personal stories. And I'll be adding a practical focus to the conversation based on my 30 years in the business. So if you're interested in not just learning how, but also how else, then this pod is for you. Hi, this is Steve Raye, and welcome to this week's edition of Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People on the Italian Wine Podcast. This week, I'm pleased to have as a guest Bourcard Nesin of Rabobank. Bourcard, welcome to the show.
Hey, wonderful to be here. I love doing podcasts.
So to that end, you do your own podcast. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar from what you do here. We tend to invite high-profile guests, so I would never be allowed on my own show, but that sounds like I'm insulting yours. We basically have people from Constellation Brands, ABI, Wall Street Journal on to talk about the beverages industry for people who make decisions in the beverage industry. So I should say it's called Liquid Assets. It's a very good show. And, thanks for having me on yours.
And it's available wherever podcasts are sold, kind of a thing? Okay.
If you don't know how to find a podcast, how are you listening to this?
Tell us a little bit about your role and responsibility at Rabobank.
Yeah, Rabobank is a bank. Does banky stuff, and it finances and supports the beverages industry. Within that context, I'm kind of their internal expert on beverages and the workings of the market. And so, I build networks and do research and produce podcasts. And it just so happens one of my principal remits is e-commerce. And why is that my remit? I'm under 40 years old, and that's basically it. I am young, and therefore my business said, Bourcard, e-commerce, your thing.
Yeah, I remember there was a movie back late in the 70s, I think. It said, son, I only have one word for you, plastics. Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate. And that dates me. Anyway, so let's cut to the chase about e-commerce. And you recently published a document called the E-commerce Playbook 2022, which I think is a seminal publication. And I think it's opened a lot of people's eyes to some fundamental issues that they have to deal with because they're mission critical these days. And the big conclusions that you came to are, why don't you tell us?
Yeah, it's helpful to understand what the report is. So the report is basically me going out into the market and figuring out how big the U.S. alcohol e-commerce market is. And that's a very hard task. I don't know any organizations or data sources that do it as well as I do. And so that's its top line thing. The top line thing is this is how big the opportunity is, but that's not the takeaway I want companies to have. The takeaway I want companies to have is, here, this is the opportunity, but the real problem isn't, the size of the opportunity, but that alcohol companies aren't investing enough in their e-commerce capabilities, and they're underestimating the work it takes to succeed online, and they're underestimating, more importantly, how much online sales, e-commerce, digital retail media, and your overall digital presence influences your brand's performance online and off.
Okay, that's a lot of meat to cover, so let's jump right into it. And the last point about how important it is for brand communications is one I think that's often overlooked. And executives tend to hold e-commerce and, for that matter, social media to a higher standard than they would traditional advertising.
Yeah. I think fundamentally there's this at the core of my message is something called digitally influenced sales, right? Digitally influenced sales are basically the idea that every time somebody sees your brand, it's an opportunity to tell your story. And whether that's on a website or in a store with a merchandising sign or, an expert review with a 92 2-point rating on it, whatever. Like those are all chances to build your brand. And because consumers are more buried in their phone than ever, and they're more likely to walk into oncoming traffic than look at a billboard, the chances are first time they're going to see your brand is on the internet. And if your brand isn't looking beautiful and isn't looking great, it's not going to perform and get people's attention in store and online. Why do people or executives apply a different standard to digital media, say social media spend or retail media spend? It comes fundamentally down to the idea that, you can more easily measure digital media's performance in terms of return on advertising spend or ROAS. But if you negate those digitally influenced sales, you're going to undervalue it. So I think that's the fundamental problem there.
So e-commerce has grown dramatically. The numbers I think you've used was, I think, something like 4 to 6% prior to the pandemic, 6 to 8% of total sales now, and heading towards 12 to 15 and on to 20 and perhaps even more. One of the points you made is that as e-commerce increases, there will be an inflection point where it exceeds traditional off-premise sales. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. So before the pandemic, wine sales specifically, less than 4% were online in the US. Now it's more than 10%, closer to 11%. And in terms of percentage of sales, that's getting really close to the 20% of on-premise sales that in terms of volumes that wine brands sell in the on-premise. And it's a very good moment because, as I've just kind of pointed out, a lot of people are discovering your brands for the first time online. And more than anything, the online consumer tends to be way younger and wealthy and more urban than your typical consumer. And this is a consumer that the wine industry has been terrified about losing for so long. If you want to find them, they're probably going to be online. And so it's, the e-commerce is as much a brand building and marketing channel as it is a sales channel. And it is a tenth of wine sales overall in the U.S. And, it's probably a moment to recognize that the e-commerce space is starting to look and sound a lot like the on-premise, both in scale and purpose. And if you look as a brand, the resources and resourcing you give to your on-premise business, and then look at the resourcing you give to e-commerce business, it might be a fairly good indicator of whether or not you're investing enough. And the answer is almost universally no. As a company, you're not investing enough.
So to be clear, though, we're not saying that on-premise is going away. We're merely saying that the size of that piece of the business is going to be eclipsed by e-commerce, and that on-premise still plays a significant role. Obviously, it's where you can taste something, which is the one thing you can't do.
But that's also really important to you understand that e-commerce is also where you can taste something, right? If somebody's buying your brand for the first time online, that is not an online-only transaction. Eventually, there's a box that arrives at your house, and inside the box is a bottle. And you grab the bottle, you put it in your mouth, or if you're like me, you pour it in a glass, and you taste the wine, and you hold the bottle, and you check it out, and you're like, wow, this is really cool. Chances are, next time you see that wine in a supermarket, you're going to buy it there too, because it was good and delicious, right? So it's really important to understand that e-commerce is a driver of trial, as a driver of discovery. The way that brands are able to tell their story online is very analogous to the on-premise. And in terms of scale, it's getting really close to the same size. So I think it is really important for you to use that as a guide to what your investment in e-commerce should be.
Okay, but one point about on-premise is what you were talking about happens asynchronously. On-premise happens at the point of purchase, either immediately before or rejection, whatever it happens to be. I don't think that's ever going to go away with a food product or something that you put in your mouth. That's always going to be the ultimate arbiter.
I agree.
The other point that you made, I thought that was really shocking, was a quote about wine.com and only 5% of the brands doing a good job of optimizing their presence online. Could you explain more about that?
Yeah. So it might surprise you, but I have to tell a lot of companies that it is their responsibility to manage their brand's presence and the content of their brand on retailers' websites, right? So if we think of a Total Wine and More, it is your brand's responsibility to send your brand's content to Total Wine and More. It is your company's responsibility to send the images and descriptions to wine.com. And so I was at a panel with someone from wine.com back in January, and I asked them, because I was moderating, hey, you guys have thousands of suppliers selling to you guys. how many of those wineries are proactively sending you content, meaning that they say, hey, I want to make sure that the right image is there and I want to send you the right, the right descriptions, and I want to make my brand come to life on wine.com, which is the place where a lot of people will discover it for the first time. And they said only 5%. 1 in 20 wineries are proactively sending them content. And when wine.com reaches out, about 45% then reply with something. That leaves 50% sending nothing and only 5% actively managing their brand online. And I'm not sure if somebody at a retailer said, hey, do you want to build a display for your brand as an end cap? Do you want to build a display for your brand in this retailer place? And you never respond to that email? I mean, come on. Like that, please, please, please. This is really important for brands to do, and they just don't do it.
Yet it's the reality. So when you say you, the brand was the phrase you used, but whose responsibility is it? Because nobody seems to be assuming the responsibility. So it could be, when you say the brand, is it the brand owner? Is it the export manager? Is it the marketing manager, especially for export brands? Is it the salespeople that are in the U.S. or the brand ambassadors? Is it the importer? Is it the distributor? All the way down the line there. And the answer is no, it's none of those. Who is?
Kind of. The reality is...
It's no one of those is the way I wanted to say that.
So one of the challenges is that companies that are incredibly good at managing the brands online have one thing in common. They invest in people. Right? They have a dedicated e-commerce person. They have a dedicated e-commerce team. For smaller brands, that's not always an option. So you have a bunch of choices to make. Personally, I think it is the brand's responsibility, and use your existing infrastructure to make sure that information ends up in the right hands, right? So if you're an import brand and you have a brand manager that's producing content, make sure that there is somebody on your team that has that responsibility and then transfers that information to the relevant parties, in the end market. I think it's also worth saying that, for a single brand, one of the reasons content is so hard is that each retailer has a different set of content, different set of requirements, and a different process for receiving that information. And for a single brand, it can be very difficult to learn all of those things all from scratch, from nothing, right? That's where a distributor can be really helpful. And it's really important as importers and distributors kind of tackle the e-commerce challenge and content within that. This is a skill set that your partners need to have. And it's something that if they don't have, you need to lobby them to get, because your distributor's going to be able to create huge efficiencies by doing this for the brands in their portfolio. And I would really think the future is, and a major criteria for selecting a distributor is that skill set. Can you help me manage my brand in the internet?
The assumption being that someone has a choice in distribution. And when you're new, I'm thinking about new brands, and oftentimes it's whoever says yes first or whoever says yes.
Yeah. But even then, the simple reality is that as a new brand, there's an expectation that you build your brand. You cannot hand your brand off to a distributor and expect them to sell it and open up all these new accounts. You're expected to go out and put the feet on the ground and do the brand development and prove that you're going to back up the brand. And if you're putting all that work in and there's somebody on the ground, then make sure that person has e-commerce or at least, content management as part of their skill set, so you can control that. And if your brand is growing and getting some, traction, you can start lobbying or pushing for, your partners to support the brand online and in store, just like you'd expect them to do in any important channel.
Are you enjoying this podcast? Don't forget to visit our YouTube channel, Mama Jumbo Shrimp, for fascinating videos covering Stevie Kim and her travels across Italy and beyond, meeting winemakers, eating local foods, and taking in the scenery.
So the point I was trying to make before, and I think we're both saying the same thing, because there are so many people involved, there's nobody in charge. And that ultimately somebody in senior management either has to take charge or assign responsibility for that. And that person has to come up with a plan to pull together the resources that they need. One of the tools that has been used in the past 15 years, 20 years has been brand ambassadors. My fundamental problem with that is they're uneconomical and they're not scalable. So
are brand ambassadors what older people call influencers?
They were before there was an internet.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So brand ambassadors were defined as, quote unquote, feet on the street, boots on the ground, people that you employ to basically shadow what the distributor sales force is doing and generate sales to deliver to them, do their job for them, or that's the way it's expressed. It was never efficient. It was a new thing, and it was a valuable way of differentiating yourself from other brands. Then it became everybody was doing it, and therefore it had no value when you were the 12th guy selling scotch walking into a bar saying, I'm from such and such scotch company and I'm here to help. And how much help can they really stand is the answer. So rather than that, I think what's happened is that's been supplanted by this much more efficient, scalable, cost efficient, and scalable. Call it a tool if we want. I call it optimizing your brand content online, however it gets done. Beyond the fact of doing it once, but it's also evergreen and scrapable. Ergo, the efficiency. Can you comment on that?
So very interesting. So one of the challenges of updating content is that, you change your packaging, you need to update content, or you have a retailer that just has old content systems, or like an intern entering the data, and mistakes are made constantly. And so, I would actually, when you said evergreen, I assume that you mean there's an impression that you only have to update content once, but the reality is you need to constantly be.
The placeholder is there. It's up to you to make sure that it's.
You're right. What ends up happening is if you don't send a retailer content, either your product doesn't have an image next to it, which means nobody will buy it because nobody knows what your product is and what they're buying. And the moment a consumer feels unsure or indecisive or confused, they stop and they buy your competitor's brand. But yeah, that's a very good point there.
One of the tools that people can use, I do it in my book, pages 259 to 263, which was basically a set of facts I put together with Wine Searcher saying, this is the content we want. This is the format in which we want it. That can function as a template for when you assign somebody with the responsibility of optimizing content. You give them those pages and you say, do this. You address the same things in your e-commerce playbook. One of the things I meant to ask when you mentioned it, or when I addressed it earlier, can people get a copy of this thing? Is it readily available?
Yeah, I'm a man of the people. It is free to the public because so many people in the industry contributed to it. So I probably spoke with 50 people and they all made it possible for the report to get published. So it's public. And speaking to that, about managing your brand's content online, this is actually one of those areas where I think it's really okay for you to hire a gun for the job, right? I think it is perfectly okay for you to go out and there,
as opposed to assign from existing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just kind of complicated. And if you're under-resourced and don't have the bandwidth to do it, there are services out there to help brands get this off the ground. It's okay to do that. Small brands don't have the capacity to just get things done. So, there are services out there that help you with it. And I'm okay with that.
Answer the argument. Somebody says, well, I'm not big enough. I can't afford somebody. Well, don't hire an FTE, full-time employee. Go find somebody who can do this job and just this job on a contract basis. The issue is, I think there's a lot of reasons people come up with why they don't do it, and none of them are sufficient, either together or on their own. It's just the entity saying, no, I don't see that as a business priority for us. And what we're saying here is it absolutely is.
And, the main reason that companies hadn't invested in e-commerce in the past is they would point to the top line sales number that I would produce and go, 1% of sales. It's 2% of sales. It's 3% of sales. And then it's like, yeah, but, and this is the example I got from a buddy of mine, Wayne Dwan, who's the VP of e-commerce at Constellation Brands. They basically said, yes, okay. 3% of your sales on, Total Wine and More are online. It's actually a lot more than that for them, but let's just say that 3% of your sales on Total Wine and More is that. Of the 97%, 40% of that is digitally influenced sales, right? So in reality, it's much closer to 45, 50% of your business on Total Wine and More is impacted by your brand's digital content and your brand's presence online. And if that's the actual impact, then you invest differently. And so that's always my constant reminder is the reason you aren't investing in e-commerce is because you do not understand how absolutely important it is to your brand's performance online and off. Therefore, invest more than you are. And I think if you do understand that and you internalize that, hiring one full-time employee is no longer a question. It's how many.
Yeah, so not doing it is not an option. It's kind of not just mission critical. We're all living in a world that's where the standards are defined by Amazon and some of the big social media platforms, and we're competing in a world where they set the standards and we have to live up to those standards to be equal. Otherwise, we're seen as inferior and they'll go someplace else to buy.
Yeah.
Okay, moving the conversation a little bit further. You had said at one point that retailers who have been the backbone of the business, and I'm differentiating this from the supermarket side of the business, which we might get to later.
Mom and pop shops.
They're worried, rightfully, I think, that Drizly is taking over the relationship with consumers. In fact, it is. You quoted Mike Fish, and I interviewed his dad, Gary Fish, of Gary's Wines and Marketplace in New Jersey. He said it, I thought, very, very eloquently. He said, Drizly helps me sell bottles, but City Hive helps me build my business. City Hive is I'll let you describe it.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So Drizly is a marketplace, right? So you shop brands and order brands, and the retailer is basically the fulfillment partner, right? They don't really get to be in front of the consumer at all. Whereas City Hive is basically like Shopify for alcohol retailers, which is, to say that you build your own branded website and sell to the consumer through, a product page that for all intents and purposes appears to be run by you. But in reality, the back end is completely run by this third party City Hive. And so, yeah, I think that there is a big issue with companies like Drizly. They tend to charge more for retailers and in terms of percentage of transactions. And the consumer buys alcohol without ever interacting with the retailer's brand. And so there's a huge incentive for retailers to, push Drizly traffic to their own website so that they can control that customer relationship.
And I think people are recognizing that. Certainly I am when I think about ordering food online. I always opt to go to the restaurant itself as opposed to Grubhub or something like that. And the same thing with tips. I'd rather give them as cash to the delivery guy rather than include it on the thing. But I don't think that's that common. How do online sales differ from in-store sales beyond what we've just been talking about? In this case, it was who owns the data, the retailer or not. But from the perspective of the consumer and where they get information and how they're confronted with information. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So a couple of things. Online shopping is fundamentally a different consumer. So it's important to understand that there is no online consumer. There's basically just omni-channel consumers. So even consumers that buy alcohol online, the likelihood is the vast majority of their alcohol purchases are in store. So people who shop online also shop in store and often from the same retailer. It just so happens that the people who do shop online tend to be wealthier. That means they have tend to demand much higher priced, more premium products. So the online space tends to, you would look at craft beer selling better than domestic beer, for example. The average wine price on wine.com is going to be in the $20, $30 range, whereas the total US it's closer to $10, $11. So you've got a more premium consumer. They also tend to buy larger pack sizes, and I think that is both a function of the fact that buying online means you don't have to carry it home. Somebody else carries it for you a lot of times, but also the fact that richer people can buy in bulk because they have the resources to do it. And so there's a element of bulk buying in online. But once a consumer does get to the online space, it's really important to understand that, one, they're almost always going to buy the first product that they see, not the first product, but the first few products they see. If you're on the second page of search results, something like 80% of consumers are never going to see the second page. But even then, once consumers buy your product, they tend to keep reordering the same thing over and over again because it's a very efficient process typically. So if somebody bought your wine once and they like it, chances are it's going to be right there in their basket. They're going to go back, log in, fill out their grocery order or whatever they're doing and just click buy again. Whereas in the in-store environment, chances are they're going to get distracted by an opportunity to buy a brand on discount, or there's a lot more stimulation. And so there's a lot less brand loyalty in store than there is online, which is one reason it's so important to get the first sale and be the first brand in their basket because it pays off long-term in terms of lifetime customer value.
So it sounds like online should be a primary strategy for export or what we would call imported brands. You're selling wine at a higher price, or the wine that is purchased at a higher price. And then there is more of an opportunity to establish some level of repeat purchase, or you can use the word brand loyalty. And yet, most of the export producers that I talk with and work with don't get this, don't do that, don't recognize this. Why is that?
I mean, it's the same stuff we talked about, right? It's not understanding the role of digitally influenced sales. It's not understanding the size of the market or necessarily the opportunity for your brand in particular, right? If you're, not aware that, consumers are looking for premium products in the $20, $25 price point as the norm, then you might not recognize that that's the key opportunity for your brand. So it's underestimating the size of the market, underestimating the scope of the impact of your brand's digital presence. Yeah, it's over and over again.
I think a big part too is kind of the fundamental thing I've been wrestling with for years is that it's lack of understanding of how the U.S. market operates. They may be able to sell to somebody in Germany and that person takes on the responsibility of marketing that brand through the supermarkets or something like that. That's not the way it works here. It's not one country. It's 52 different regulatory entities, and you can't think of the United States that way. But going forward with this, there have been a couple of significant strides made in the way people shop for wines when I think about label recognition technology. And I've seen the dynamics of that be really, really significant. Can you talk about the significance of label recognition technology and how it has played out for the Drizzlies of the world?
I'm looking at something like Vivino. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Vivino is what I use when I go to buy wine. Why? Because there's so much stuff there. I don't know what to pick out. So I scan until I find a wine with a high rating and a low price point, and I buy that. And oftentimes it's okay. So, that is a digitally influenced sale to a degree. Again, people will scan your wine. They'll read about it on Vivino, and you need to make sure your content's updated on Vivino. And, just as, and then say somebody, hey, I'm discovered your wine using the scanning technology, and now I'm going to search for your winery into Google. Well, guess what? The chances are they're going to end up on a retail website anyways. So now, instead of finding your website, this person's shopped on Drizzly historically, so they're going to the retail page on Drizzly or the product page on Drizzly, and that's where they learn about your brand. That's where they understand the history of your winery and your product. So, oftentimes, people just don't end up on your website, end up on other people's, regardless of where they started, whether that's a scanning technology or, already on a retailer website.
We began this conversation talking about, you call mom and pop, I call independents, but what other people call brick and mortar retailers, stores. The one piece that we haven't addressed here and does play prominently in the 2020 or e-commerce playbook 2022 is grocery. And a lot of times I find, again, for export brands that they want to get into the grocery market. They said, yeah, I want to sell in supermarkets in New York. Well, that's not going to happen, right? It's an indication that they don't know what's going on. But there's a completely different set of products that retailers are going to carry on the grocery aisle that are already proven rather than new and to be discovered items. How do I communicate that to my clients that's not where you want to be? Grocery is maybe where you end up with your entry-level products.
Yeah, I guess that's just a go-to-market strategy. And, when it comes to e-commerce, because I guess that's the framework we're using, there isn't basically all grocery sales are executed from online anyways, from the retail shelf. Basically, they pay somebody to put product on the shelf and then they pay somebody to take it off again and hand it to a driver to deliver it to your home. So if you don't have distribution in a grocery store, you're not going to be able to sell through a grocery store online. That might change in the future in terms of, using different fulfillment modalities. But for the most part, that's not where you start in the market. Though I do think there's a really good point here, which is this concept of brands are built in the on-premise, right? And I think that's relevant here as well, which is to say that, if, a lot of times you're selling through smaller outlets and on-premise accounts, because that is a sell story. You are selling as much as you can through those channels and supporting your brand and showing, hey, you can perform well, in on-premise accounts and in all these mom and pop shops. And you are able to tell that story to your distributor, and then you get the great distributor, and then that distributor then gets excited and then pitches it to the retailer. It's how you win allies is the on-premise, and it's not necessarily a consumer-facing function, but is a trade-facing one. And I guess there are similar opportunities in the online space as well. But for the most part, it's not necessarily an e-commerce commentary there. But, to me, the magic thing about, brands are built in the on-premise as an adage is just as much a trade-facing activity as a, consumer-facing one. So,
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of, it's too simple to be of any value in the world that's with such fragmented communications and sales opportunities as we live in.
Yeah. And so, that would be, basically what we're both agreeing then is that, hey, build your brands in these channels that have lower barriers to entry and prove you can perform. And then you get to go and knock on the door of the big boys. But for now, you can't just skip all those steps.
Anyway, bringing this all around, I like to end my interviews with asking people, what's the big takeaway? What's the practical thing that they can put to work immediately? And I think this is one of the most unique interviews I've done where we told them what we were going to tell them. We told them, and now you're going to tell them again. What did we tell them?
Yeah, read the report, the 2020 Alcohol E-commerce Playbook. It's going to give much more concise and direct details than I can here. But what I will say is, I got asked, what do you want a CEO to learn from this research you're doing? What do you want them to feel? And first thing, I want to make them really uncomfortable. I want to make it super clear that, not investing in e-commerce is a really bad decision, but also it's something you should see coming. I spoke to the top investor from wine.com and asked them, hey, you've been the main investor of wine.com for 20 years now? Like, why do you keep at it? And they said, every year I look in the calendar and I say, next year, is e-commerce going to grow? And every year the answer is yes. And so the reality is that you can look 10, 20, 25 years down the road and say, yep, e-commerce is going to keep growing. And it's growing not only in terms of importance of top line sales, but also in terms of brand building. So, you as a brand can see the writing on the wall because it's obvious that e-commerce is going to keep growing. And if you don't invest now, you're going to have to invest a lot more to catch up. So that's my message. Be uncomfortable and know that, if you don't do it now, it only gets worse.
I would urge everyone who's listening to get a copy of the e-commerce playbook 2022, because I think Bourcard does a fabulous job of articulating it all and putting it into context more than we can do in a conversation like this. If we had a couple of hours, maybe, but given the time constraints. So I want to thank you for sharing that knowledge, wisdom, insight. And it's not a look over the horizon, people. It's where we are today. So get with the program or get out of the business. Might be that simple. So thank you, Bourcard, for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing you in person somewhere. We've Zoomed a lot, but not met in person.
Yeah, we're opening back up. If you can't see me in person, you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @Beverage Podcast. My podcast is called Liquid Assets, and I work for a place called Rabobank. And if you want to find the report, it's available at research.rabobank.com. And leave Steve a review. It helps other people discover his podcast. And I will be immediately stopping this recording and I will be going on to Apple Podcasts and I'm going to leave him a little 5-star gift. And I think he deserves that.
Thank you very much, Bourcard. Well, that's it for this week. Tune in next week and we'll have another interesting interview. Thank you.
As interesting, though? More interesting than me? Okay. Another okay. Yeah.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that on purpose.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Vinitaly Academy, home of the gold standard of Italian wine education. Do you want to be the next ambassador? Apply online at vinitalyinternational.com for courses in London, Austria, and Hong Kong, the 27th to the 29th of July. Remember to subscribe and like Italian Wine Podcast and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find our entire back catalog of episodes at ItalianWinePodcast.com.
guys, I'm Joy Livingston, and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love, and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.